Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. Day 7 of the festival. Welcome. My name is Dorota Lech. I'm the Programming Associate for Documentaries here at TIFF, and I co-program the Doc Conference along with documentary programmer Tom Powers. It's my pleasure to welcome you to year 7 of the Doc Conference. I want to give a big thank you to Molly Thompson and A&E Studios for their generous support throughout the years. The Doc Conference, as many of you all know, is a showcase of thought leaders on the creative and business sides of documentary. We're very proud of this year's lineup, and we hope that you will join us for the full day of sessions. Our first session of the day will be In Documentaries Begin Responsibilities and in conversation with ASIF Kapadia. This session will be followed by 7 awesome tips for selling your film directly with Jeremy Boxer from Vimeo. After a short break, we'll return with Abby Lewis and Naomi Klein, as well as Katie McKenna, speaking about their new film in a session entitled Do Docs Change Anything? The next session, and I know this sounds like a lot, so stick around, it's all going to be very interesting information, is Dangerous Docs, Documentaries versus Journalism, and we'll have a small surprise at the beginning of that session. This session will be followed by The Year Kickstarter Broke $100 million for Documentaries with Dan Schönbrunn and George Schmaltz. We will then go into Finding the Money, a new study on documentary and philanthropy with Dr. Marilyn Burgess, Maria DeRosa, and Executive Director of the IDA, Simon Kilmurray. Our second to last session is called Your Film Can Change the World If the Right People See It. It's directed by Christy Marchese of Picture Motion, and we will close off the day with Rice Thomas, Alex Buono, and Bill Hader via Skype in Documentary Now. I'd like to remind you that we've changed the format a little bit, as you've probably seen on our website. Some of the sessions are TED-style talks, which means that there won't be a Q&A after. Some of the sessions will have a Q&A afterwards. I ask that you please not approach the stage after any of the sessions. Everyone will be around in the cocktail following the Doc Conference at 5:30, and we hope you'll all join us there. And now it's time to introduce my co-programmer. Tom Powers has been the documentary programmer at TIFF since 2006. He started the Doc Conference 7 years ago in 2009. Notable speakers have included Alex Gibney, Andrew Jarecki, Ramin Barani, Michael Moore, Joshua Oppenheimer, Sheila Nevins, Errol Morris, Shola Lynch, and Werner Herzog. For 9 years, Tom curated TIFF's Maverick section, a discussion series hosting cinematic endeavors. He oversees programming for Sundance Now Doc Club, programs docs at the Miami International Film Festival, is the artistic director of Doc NYC, runs the weekly Stranger Than Fiction series in Manhattan's IFC Center, and also helped found the Montclair Film Festival. As if that doesn't keep him busy enough, he is also teaching doc producing at the School of Visual Arts and is one of my mentors and good friends. Please join me in welcoming Tom Powers.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is always one of my favorite days of the year when we get to do these Doc Conference sessions and bring in all kinds of interesting people over the years. There's been a lot of sessions here that have rippled out. I think a few years ago of Liesl Copeland's talk about digital numbers, show us the numbers. That continues to be something that is a subject of conversation out there. Last year, our keynote was Michael Moore. I thought I was going to have a conversation with Michael Moore. I sat over there waiting for him to finish his introductory remarks, and he took an hour at the podium. Making his, giving a kind of manifesto. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, I wonder if this guy's ever gonna make a documentary again, because I hadn't really heard of him, talking about anything. And of course, now he is back this year with a new documentary. So when we started thinking about putting together this year's program in the spring, there was one person that we knew we wanted to include, and that is our first keynote conversation, ASIF Kapadia. We were thinking about this around the time of the Cannes Film Festival, where his film Amy made its debut. And I have to say, Amy played at Cannes in a midnight screening that probably actually started about 12:30, and it's 2 hours long. And I kind of felt like this film had everything going against it for people to, fall asleep during. But the crowd, myself included, was absolutely riveted by that film, whether you were a passionate fan of Amy Winehouse or, like me, more of a newcomer to her. And I at one point held out a hope for having Amy at the Toronto Film Festival, but it did just fine for itself, opening up in theaters this summer and becoming the highest grossing documentary of the year. There's a lot of interesting questions raised by Amy and how you document a life, what stories you choose to include, what stories you choose to leave out, whose perspective gets foregrounded and whose perspective gets moved to the background. These are questions that are relevant to anyone making a documentary film, and so I talked to ASIF over the summer to see if we could scratch some of this question, and he agreed. I'm very happy at that. So we called this session, "In Documentaries Begin Responsibilities," mangling a line from Yeats. And we're gonna, before I bring ASIF out, we're gonna show a little teaser from Amy. So if you can show that, Mr. Projectionist.
Singing has always been important to me, but I never thought, oh, I'll end up singing, I'll be a singer. I just thought I'm lucky that it's something I can always do if I want to. I'm so lucky like that. I felt like I had nothing new that was coming out at the time that really represented me or the way I felt. So I just started writing. I wouldn't write anything unless it was directly personal to me, just because I wouldn't be able to tell the story right. I'm not a girl trying to be a star or trying to be anything other than a musician.
How big do you think you're going to be?
I don't think I'm going to be at all famous. I don't think I could handle it. I would probably go mad, you know what I mean? I would go mad.
Is it hard to know who you can trust?
Yeah.
Please welcome ASIF Kapadia.
Thank you.
I should say ASIF flew in just late last night. He's here just for a day, and so we're really grateful to you making the time for us at Toronto.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for asking me to come.
So, quickie background, you direct fiction films. A few years ago, you made the film Senna, documentary Senna, that took a pretty innovative approach by being compiled strictly of archival footage. And that film did very well for itself. How did Amy begin?
I mean, Amy really began kind of off the back of Senna. Senna had been seen by quite a few people and had a few fans, and there was someone at Universal Music who'd seen it and had loved it and got in touch with my producer on Senna, James Gay-Rees, and just said, look, I really like that film. Would you ever consider making a film like that about Amy Winehouse? It was a strange thing because somebody approached us. And James was intrigued, I think, because this guy, David Joseph, had said, warts and all, you can tell the full story. So James went, ooh, that could be interesting. He called me up. The interesting thing was post-Senna, we had lots of offers to do sports films. And I love sports, but I didn't really want to do another one. I was trying to find the right subject to do something different. I didn't want to repeat myself. And then I got a call from James saying, what do you think? Would you be interested in Amy? And for me, I wasn't a huge fan. I never met her. I never saw her live. But I'm a North Londoner, and she literally lived down the road. She was very much local. I lived in that area, Camden, for about 10 years. So this tornado, this storm of kind of paparazzi and all of that was just going on down there, and we all kind of ignored it and got on with our lives. And there was just something about her being a local girl that intrigued me as much as the fame and the music and all of that. I didn't really understand why. I remember at the time thinking, why is she on stage? She doesn't look great. Why is she stumbling around the streets? Why is this going on? Why is no one stopping it? I never really understood. So part of it was for me to get answers to my own kind of questions. And through the journey, I learned about her. I knew nothing at the start, really.
You know, one of the things that I was thinking about in approaching this conversation is that, you know, a film like Senna and now Amy, those are now the go-to biographies of those two individuals. I'm sure if you're a deep racing fan, there are other sources that you might seek out to get other perspectives on Senna. And before Amy, there was, you know, an endless reams of kind of tabloid coverage of her. But now, you know, whatever existed before has kind of been reshaped by your projects. It's a documentary film that, you know, travels the world and is on Netflix. If anyone wants to know that subject, this is what they're going to get, probably as the first stop. And I wonder how much you think about that. You think about that you're shaping the record of this person's life.
I think it's a good question because it has different sides. One is, why should you make a film about anyone when there have already been so many films made about that person? So I guess for me, as a filmmaker, it has to be, it's only worth doing if you can feel and hope you can make like the definitive film, the film that kind of covers everything. I guess I'm ready to spend as long as it takes to try to get it right. So Senna was like 5 years, and from the very beginning of the process, it was a nearly 7-year film. Amy was about 3 years, over 3 years. So my feeling is a lot of the other movies, no one had spent that much time on them.
Senna, you came at because you had a real passion for.
No.
It wasn't.
I mean, weirdly enough, I don't really want to make films about things I'm really passionate about.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, because I'm already a fan. My fear is if I make a film about something I love, I might hate it by the end. So I kind of go in there with the opposite. I'm not a fan. I'm like the audience. I'm like, I want to get people who are not interested in sport and motor racing to go and see a film about sport and motor racing, because it's about more than that. He's pretty amazing and pretty special. And so my feeling is I'm the first audience of cynics, in a way. Why would I want to pay money to go to the cinema? I can watch it on TV. The races were all free in most of the world. Why would I pay money? So that's where I come in. On Senna, there was an expert on the team, a guy called Manish Pandey, who was the writer who is a Senna obsessive, read every book, seen every race, was absolutely nuts about the subject. I was the opposite. I was like, no one cares. No one's interested in this. You've got to take it out. That's detail. And so that was quite an interesting kind of creative argument that happened. With Amy, it was different, actually. There were no experts. I realized that nobody really knew the full story. There was nobody around for the whole time. Lots of different groups of people, lots of compartments in her life, all of whom didn't speak to one another, who were arguing with one another, and I had to become the expert. So that's kind of the thing, is I don't really know that much about the subject. I'm going to learn along the way. If I think it's interesting, I hope the audience will think it's interesting. And then as a filmmaker, my feeling is always I've got to make them as cinematic as possible. I don't want it to feel like, because I have made fiction and I have made documentaries, and I'm a storyteller, I'm a director, and my job is to I'm interested in that space in the middle of the two. I want people to go and see a movie and think, I could go and see that, or see Amy or Senna, and not think, but I'm not in the mood for a documentary. I don't want them to think, it's movies. These are movies that you pay money to see on the big screen and you have an experience. And I want them to be emotional and engaging, and that's a big part of it. And a big part of that is to make them feel as cinematic as they possibly can be.
So we have a couple clips to share and contextualize for the audience. The first one is called Happy Birthday, and it's perhaps a good introduction to the amount of material that you were able to find on Amy Winehouse's life. Do you want to set up this clip?
I mean, this is the opening of Amy. It's really interesting. On a lot of the films that I've directed, it's like literally the opening is a bit that we end up messing around with the most in the edit. It comes and it goes, and you try this out, and you stick with something for a couple of years, and then right at the end, and you chuck it out, and you're saying, what about this? And so we had trouble trying to find the right way to open the film, and we ended up choosing this, and I feel like it's an interesting thing because it's setting up a lot of elements, but also you're trying to kind of get the audience used to this is the style of film you're about to watch, I suppose, because it's home video, it's home movies, but technically it may not be great, but it's just like emotionally, hopefully it grabs you. So maybe we should have a look.
So the projection booth will show the clip "Happy Birthday."
These are the only three people left. This is Mr. Alex Steele, Mrs. Juliet Ashby, Mrs. Amy Willis. In other words, Mrs. Amy Winehouse. And everyone else is gone. This was my full.
Do you want to lick of the lollipop? Come on, have a lick.
No, I
Have a
don't.
lick.
No, no one wants. I'm trying to talk. No one wants to lick your
Lauren,
slobbery
just
lollipop.
lick it.
Here's me. It's my 14th birthday evening in party. Yes, oh,
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Laura. Happy birthday to you.
So talk to me about the process of uncovering footage like that. I might have thought that Amy Winehouse is a big star. Every frame of footage of her life must have been bought and sold before you came along to make your documentary.
Yeah, I mean, this was the real kind of crux of the story. There was a real kind of heavy tabloid representation of Amy and of Amy when she became famous. But what we found making the film was there was a whole story that she had a life before she became famous. And that became the thing that kind of grabbed me. That this person who was really funny and healthy and beautiful and having fun, enjoying herself, hanging out with her mates. And it started off with her first manager, a guy called Nick Szymanski, who I got to know, who happened to... what's interesting is we're talking about middle-class kids who family had a bit of money, so they had home videos. This is all pre-iPhones. This is pre-camera phones. And so Nick happened to have a video camera, and he just filmed everything. And so you see them going to gigs, you see them driving around in a car, you see her getting changed in toilets and restrooms and kind of just eating, food. And it's just you're hanging out with her. And he was the first guy who really opened the door to the story, and the real Amy, as everyone seemed to call her friends. He said, you've got to talk to two people, Julia and Lauren, who are the two friends in that clip. They've never given interviews, they've never spoken to anyone. They're just like Amy, they know everything. They're really in a way I found when I met them, they were really in pain because the Amy that they knew wasn't the person that the world seemed to talk about. They knew this other girl.
For us, when you're meeting them, how long after Amy's death was that?
Okay, so the film, the initial conversation of do I want to make this film was maybe 12 to 14 months, only 12 to 14 months after Amy had died. So she died in summer of 2011. This is 2012. I was doing a film for the London Olympics at the time. And that was the reason why I was thinking about the city. And that's why when this came along, I was in the right place to think, actually, yeah, I'm ready to make a film about home, about where I'm from. So I thought it was too soon. I'm like, why does anyone want to go and see a film about someone who we think we know everything? But I thought, let me just start having a few conversations.
You forgot how long it takes to make a film.
That was one of the things. The last one took 5 years. Who knows when this film will come out? The other thing was I kind of did this I suppose I did a bit of an experiment on this film. There was never a document. There was no piece of paper. Somebody asked me, do you want to make this film? I said, I'll do it if you just leave me alone, let me speak to everyone, and then I'll figure out what the story is and we'll make the film. And because we'd come off the back of Senna, we were able to kind of make that demand. But I need the music, I need the publishing, I need everyone on board. If that's happening, then I'll be interested in doing the film. And so literally, I just started interviewing people. I thought, I'll just talk to people and I'll figure it out because there was no expert. And I ended up just talking to 100 people, and it was just audio interviews, no cameras. And out of those interviews, I thought, I'll figure out what the story's going to be. And Nick was the first person to sort of trust me. Trust becomes the whole question, really. Trust me enough to show me some of his home videos. And they were great, and it's all of the early stuff.
Talk about that process of gaining Nick's trust.
So there was a lot of anger. Someone has died. I mean, that's the bottom line. Someone died and died in public, and there were a lot of people who felt really angry and guilty, and there were people who felt complicit. There were people that felt I did everything I could do. It's everyone else who let it happen. So literally, I actually found myself walking into almost like a family feud. You know, there were loads of people who really didn't like one another, and I stepped into it. Nick said very quickly, I've got no interest in this film. I don't, you know, we don't want her life to be kind of exploited again. But the only reason I'm here is because I did like Senna, and my girlfriend and I at the time saw the film, and I walked out at the end of the film and thought, wouldn't it be great if someone made a film like that about Amy some point in the future, maybe 10 years, 20 years' time. And what happened was a few months later, he got a call and he said, look, I'll meet you because I like the film, but I'm no interest in being a part of this. So I said, that's fine. I'm not going to force you to do anything. But do me a favor. I don't know anything. I'm not in the music business. I don't know anyone in her life and her story. Is it okay if every now and again I just show you a picture and say, who's in this picture? And who should I talk to? And he said, fine. So he just became a person that I felt like I could trust and go to. And through that, I suppose he kind of got to know me and thought, okay, I'll talk to you. So the deal I made was, look, I don't want to talk in a cafe, in a restaurant, because I can tell it's very sensitive. It's a small town, London, you know, everyone within the kind of entertainment, music business, film business, commercials, all of that, they're all in the same few streets in Soho. So I said, why don't we go somewhere pretty safe? We'll go to a sound studio, we'll sit there, it'll just be the two of us in a room, there'll be a microphone and a table, and this is the release form. If you're not comfortable with anything you say, do not sign a release form. I can never use it, but at least I know what the story is, because you're telling me there's this awful thing that happened, but I don't know what you're talking about. And he was the first one really to agree to do that. And he didn't sign a release form. And the honest truth is he didn't sign it until a few days before Cannes. I'm not recommending this to other people, right? But my thing was, don't do it if you don't trust me, right? To everyone, it was like, I'm not a bullying kind of guy. Hopefully when you get to know me, you know that my heart is in the right place. I'm trying to tell this story. I'm going to do my best. But essentially, his interview and his footage, we may not have been able to use if he didn't sign a release.
Did you show him the film before Cannes?
I did, yeah. I like showing films. I like screening them to the people involved to kind of see where we're at. And if I've got something massively wrong, I'm quite happy to make it. I'm directing it. It's going to have my name on it. But if I've got something wrong, I'd rather know before it comes out than after. So I did let him see it, because at certain points I had to show people what I was using from their footage. Because they were like, we're not going to let you use it. Lauren and Juliet, who are in this clip, have not spoken to anyone. They have these mementos of Amy, of their best friend, of someone that they dearly love. And that's all they've got left. Because the rest of the world humiliated her and made fun of her, and comedians were on TV shows, and people around her didn't seem to be stopping what was going on. So literally, they thought no one else can see what's going on. So to get Lauren and Juliet into a room took nearly 9 months, just to get them to meet me to talk. And they would come into the room and, like, literally, they were nervous about speaking. Like, they were ready to explode, but they felt so angry and so scared. And the whole process became like therapy. It just became finding a comfortable situation for where they felt they could speak openly, and for them to not feel, I'm going to go and run off to the news of the world or a newspaper and sell the story, because that had happened a lot during Amy's life. So it was the same deal. Let me talk to you on the record.
What do you think the factors were that got them to open up to you? Was it the fact that you were from North London? Was it?
I think
just that you were a sympathetic ear who was asking questions.
I guess that was my biggest role as a director, was to earn the trust of people and for them to feel I'm not pushing you and I'm coming from the right place, and I want to understand who the real Amy is, and if I can, I'm going to find a way to show it. And they all said this film will never be seen. Nick was very clear, this film will never come out. There's no way the powers that be will ever let this film come out. So it was like, maybe I'm slightly masochistic and I don't like going for the easy options, but also if someone says that, I'm like, well, I'll find a way. That's what I do. You know, if I find something I'm passionate enough about, I'll find a way to get it out there. And it was just like these little drips of information I was getting, and I was like, oh, you know, I then knew too much. You know, I spoke to 100 people, and it's a pretty dark story, I've got to say. And then it's like, there's only so much you can show. You've got a time limit where you can put the film into. But the more I learned, the more I heard, the more I saw material-wise, the more I felt the film could be quite important about where I'm from and how we live now. You know, this idea that this can happen in front of us, that she was a kid. They were all kids at the time. You know, someone who happened to be talented and somehow became famous because of her songs and her writing about her personal experiences, this thing could happen where this machine kind of gobbles her up and then says, well, it's all your fault. And you know what? This is the music business. This is show business. You know, if you're rich and you're a millionaire, then you get what you deserve, whether you want it or not.
So something that happens often during a journalistic process of interviewing people is you interview one person and you get swept up in their version of the story, and you think, oh, wow, that's the version. And then you interview someone else, and you get a whole different version of the story.
Every day.
And so what was that process like? And, you know, were there, you know, some sharp turns in it? Was there, you know, moments where you, you know, felt like, oh gosh, what I thought before actually isn't true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're totally right. You know, you hear one point of view, and then you hear the other person a few days later saying they weren't around. They don't know what they're talking about. Right. They were off their heads on drugs, or you know. So then you have to kind of work out, okay, how much of this do I take in? You know, the couple of interviews that I did in New York actually, where the producer and I walked down the street, and we were like, you know, what the hell are we doing? What are we getting ourselves into? And then we'd ask a few other people, and they'd say they don't know what they're talking about. You know, sadly, that person themselves was an addict of something or another. So it was a real, just cross-reference in everything. And, you know, the finished film, we had to be able to prove everything in the film because, you know, there would have been a lot of litigation if we couldn't. So I think that whole process was a part of it, and it was a new thing for me, I have to say. It was a new thing to go into that, to just double-check. A big part of it is because I'm trying to make the film through archive and visual, I want to have kind of visual evidence for what's going on. I may hear 20 things, and then my job is to try and, as a director, find the shot that shows you what people are saying. It may not literally be the story that I've heard, but it will be a way of the essence of the idea or the essence of what they've been saying shown to you in a scene. So then I'm not making it up because I've heard it from enough people. Now I've got to show it to you. Because if it's just an opinion, then someone else could say the absolute opposite, and then, you know, that's a different style of filmmaking, I suppose. And for me, it's always about trying to find a way to visualize it and show it.
I want to go back to this point you made earlier that Nick said at some point, you know, they'll never let this film out. Of course, I'm saying this in the context of this festival where the film about Aretha Franklin, Amazing Grace, which she says she loves, got blocked from us being able to show. So, you know, when Nick was saying that, you know, they'll never let this film be shown, you know, what dynamic was he thinking of?
I mean, at the time, I didn't know. That was the thing. He'd say that, but then not follow it up with anything. I guess it was just this idea of, you know, what was going on behind the scenes. He was the first manager. Another team came along later on. There were other people around her. She was still performing when many of the people from her early years felt she wasn't fit to be on stage. And so that idea of, you know, who controls the kind of the estate and the music and all of that, the label, all of these sort of things, wherever it might be, there were lots of questions about these people.
Because that's key here, right? I mean, you can't really do this movie unless the people who own the music are letting you do it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's lots of people who've talked about, I'm going to do a film about this artist or that artist, but they didn't have the music in place. And then,
good luck with that.
You know, it's not going to happen. So the interesting thing in this case was they came to me, you know, so I was able to kind of set down the terms up front and say, if you don't let us to speak to everyone, and if you don't let me, you know, tell the story as we find it, then this is a really short conversation. And also, we could say, really, look, we all saw what happened. We know what she died of. We know she was on crack and heroin and coke and, you know, and alcohol. And, you know, this is not like a big revelation. And that's the really interesting thing about both Senna and Amy. And I suppose the difference that I've found between fiction and documentaries in this particular case is that we know the ending. Most people know the ending. It's all about the journey. It's all about why did we get there and how did we get there. Right. With drama, it's often like the film was great, but the ending was really, you know, it's that whole thing of the revelation. In this case, we know what happened. Oh. If we're going to make this film, we have to get into why and how and who, and so that's what we said, and that's what we set out to do, really.
So
without necessarily blaming people, just trying to explain there's a really complicated set of circumstances that came together. She made decisions, and other people around her made decisions that all added up and added up and added up with mega fame, with the media suddenly going digital, just at the point when she was really famous. So suddenly there was websites that needed to be kind of new photos had to be uploaded daily. more than once a day. It wasn't just a newspaper front page. You know, the news changed, there were more channels. She was the girl that was around when suddenly there was this phone hacking was going on. Everything happened to be going on just at a point when she was becoming famous with a big album and she was going for a particular relationship. You know, it's the worst sort of perfect storm that you can imagine.
You know, in the film, I mean, you talk about people watching the film and blaming people. You know, many viewers have a strong reaction to Amy's father in the film, who summed up in the famous lyric about the song about rehab. You know, Daddy says I don't have to go.
Yeah.
And after the film came out, the father had made some statements to the press about not liking the film, and I wonder if you can talk about that relationship and how you navigate that.
I think that's a good one, because the other layer, I suppose, to the story, quite early on, there was an instinct for me, which was just started to stop listening to the records and just reading her lyrics and realizing that once I did a bit of research, you realize the map was there. I mean, she wrote it all down. They're very personal. Every song, she's talking about a real person who then I've interviewed, or an incident, or a moment, and it's pretty verbatim, you know. And that was the other kind of bit of story, you know, this idea that she wrote it all down. These are her diaries. These are diaries that she then turned into songs. And so
that was certainly a revelation to me, but as I was watching the film, I was thinking, well, I don't know that much about Amy Winehouse. Everyone else must know that. And it only occurred to me later as I read other people's reviews that was a very kind of new understanding.
I mean, it seemed so obvious at the time. It was like, well, you know, the lyrics, the answer's there. And then you kind of talk to people, and no matter how many times you've heard the songs, you never really listened to the lyrics, or you never read them. And my own cod theory is that, you know, I'm old enough to go back to the days of buying LPs and vinyl and having, you know, the lyrics on there and knowing who played on my favorite track and where it was recorded and who they referenced and who they loved. And, you know, I knew everything about the song or the artist and, you know, what they were into. And as the medium's gone more and more digital, you know, CDs, I've got pretty bad eyesight, I'm really having trouble now. Yeah. Then it's now digital. I don't know jack shit about any song that I buy, you know. That's and that doesn't, I know it costs 99p and 99 cents, and I know I'm being screwed already. So that's all I know, you know. And the thing was to kind of almost go back to this idea. She's a young girl, you know, even that clip, she's a young girl, but she knows her references. She knows old music. She knows all this stuff. And so it was just this idea of going back to almost vinyl and going back to the idea of putting the lyrics up there, read the lyrics, and you hear the song in a totally different way. We had a few screenings where I took the lyrics off, because I thought, surely it'll still... And it's amazing how the music grabs you.
Because in the film, you
they're
spell
literally
out
on
some
screen.
of the lyrics.
Yeah, they're on screen. And at points, we've got her diary. And I really love the fact that, you know, she was always developing the songs. This is part of her. So she'll write something down. When she sings it, it's slightly different. And then every day she sung a song, she'd sing it differently, because it was however she felt that moment. She was like a method singer. You know, she's a jazz singer. It's whatever the mood is at that point, that's what you're saying, that's what you're feeling. Pop stars sing the bloody record, right? They just want to dance. They don't care what you feel, just sing the record, right? So when I spoke to a lot of executives who would say she'd wind them up because she kept changing the song or changing the pace, and so it would frustrate people, and that's what I loved about her. So part of it was to really stop people kind of just going to the voice and the music, but actually looking at what she's saying, how she's saying, and she talked about it all there. She put her heart on there. And so going back to your original question, rehab, as I was talking to Nick Szymanski, he was telling me the story about his attempt to get her cleaned up, take her to a rehab facility. She said, I'll do it if my father thinks I need to go. He set it up with him. They went there. It was all agreed. And then for whatever reason, he changed his mind and said, no, she's okay. And that's exactly what she put down in the record, you know. And that suddenly became her most famous record, is based on an incident, which he and everyone that knows Amy from an early point can't stand that record. And it's very hard to listen to that record again and to dance along once you've seen the film and once you understand the meaning behind it. You know, it was a kind of cry for help, which became a dance track.
Let me go back to your relationship with Amy's father and family and you know, how you worked with them.
So, I mean, I met everyone right at the beginning of the process. I explained that, you know, if we're going to do this, we have to make it the definitive film. We're going to have to deal with what happened at the ending. because everyone knows, and if we don't do it, people will say, it's a whitewash. You've got to go into
actually,
it.
so let me ask you a control question. I mean, who does, have the final say on Amy's music? Is it a record company executive? Is it her father, or is
it's
it?
all split. Music business. I didn't know too much about it. There's publishing, which is the writing. There's the label, who own the kind of the records, and the sales come from. If you buy a record, you get. It's always a split. It's the album sales are linked to the label, but the writing is a separate entity, and that is owned by whoever wrote each track. So you've got publishing, you've got label, you've got an estate. And so all of these different people have different, they're all essentially working together, but at different entities. And I had said to James, the producer, when he called me, if we're going to do this, you have to get all of that sorted first, or else it's just not going to happen. And that took a while. But they were essentially on board. And I think Senna
so
made a big difference.
So you're able to have that contractually papered before you launched into it.
I think if I had been exactly the same person, the same circumstances, and contacted them and said, I want to make a film, I don't think it would have happened. Mm-hmm. I think that was the big difference, is that people contacted us off the back of Senna and said, would you like to do it? And I was like, okay, if. And then it became a question of just let me talk to everyone. I don't know what the story is. And there were a couple of moments when I got messages via James saying, you're not going to talk to this person or that person. I said, I have to. I have to talk to her husband. I have to talk to her friends. I've talked to everyone. And what happened was initially that in itself can be complicated, because then people think, well, because I realized there were different factions, if you have this person, then this person may not want to talk to you because they think you're going to take a certain side or not. It was really complex. And I had to earn the trust of them. And what would happen if someone like Nick would then have a word with Juliet and Lawrence to just meet him. And that would be it. I would just say to people, give me 5 minutes. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. But generally, after 5 minutes, they go, okay, I'll talk to you. It may take months for them to then meet me. And then word behind the scenes, they were all talking to one another. And people would say, actually, it's worth being a part of it, because hopefully, somehow through the film, the real Amy would come out. The person that most people in the UK, in the States, here, in Canada, that people never saw. The young, funny, healthy, beautiful, amazing girl that she was before the mega fame and the addictions took over.
So what was the process? When did Amy's father see the film? Was that with you, or?
Yeah. I sit in on every one of those screenings, where that was part of that kind of conversation of, if we are going to get kind of footage and make the story, then I think contractually we had to show the film to the estate and the label and people like that. And then there was a kind of process where they could say what they think, and then we go away. But there wasn't, I think we had the final cut, but there was a conversation that was part of the process, and I would listen. And various people saw the film and said, you haven't got that right, you haven't got this right. And then I was like, okay, that's good to know, on different levels. It was pretty heavy screening, there's no denying it. There was, it was not, it's this thing where as you start making a film, you realize, oh my gosh, the people that you initially met to make a film about Amy are gonna become a part of the story. And what do? Do you continue making the film? Do you not go into that part of it? Or do you say, we have to, because I now know too much and we feel like this is an important part of her story? And I and my producer and my editor and I, we all felt we owed it to Amy to try to explain what was going on around her. But it's not like this kind of, I set out, I'm this angry guy that wants to pick on people. It was just like, I've got to show this is what was going on. Maybe in hindsight, people look at it and go, maybe we didn't make the right decisions for her.
I have to say, my own experience watching the film is, there are people who are very flawed in this film, including Amy herself, and people who make bad decisions, but everyone comes off as human. I mean,
and that's what it is. You're dealing with a bunch of people who, I don't know if they were set up to deal with it. I don't know if anyone who's never been in that situation of that much fame and money, all in a very short space of time. She went from nothing to huge.
I mean, even Amy's husband, who we sense really kind of held her in addiction. I felt more.
You learn about him, and you realize, he comes from a certain background, and he's not a terrible guy. He's actually a clever guy, but he himself found himself caught up in, certain addictions. She saw something in him that she connected to. And that's what brought them together. They felt like they had a lot in common. Something to do with their upbringing, something to do with their background, something to do with the fact that they needed to kind of self-medicate, because of whatever they've been through.
Can you talk about in the edit room, were you deliberate in modeling that? Were you deliberate in thinking like, here's a character who I feel is being too stereotyped, we should do something to...
Not necessarily in the edit. It came from meeting him and talking to him and hearing the story and then talking to other people. He at the time, he was a bit of a catch. In and around town, in London, he was around on the scene, and everyone, before he became the person that you saw in the paparazzi footage, he was a young, good-looking guy, a real charmer, and everyone liked this boy. And there were enough people that have told me, they were surprised that he went for Amy, because he could have gone for anyone at the time. And Amy was like this jazz artist that wasn't really famous, and so it's always more complicated. Real life is always much more complicated than a kind of fiction script. And that's what I like about making these documentaries, is that they are complex. They're not black and white ever. Everyone's got a story. And it's just a question of how much time do you have to get into the essence of it. And everyone has a background, and it's not pointing fingers at anyone. It's just trying to understand there's these 20, 30, 40 different reasons why her life turned out the way it did. And he's just one of them.
We have another clip that I think is called Back to Black. Do you want to set up this for...
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because this is the kind of... Part of the process of making these films is that I get asked to make a film, or I decide to make a movie, but I have no idea what exists at the beginning. So it's purely an instinctive gut feeling of, is this going to be a movie or not? Are we going to get away with it? Am I going to enjoy is there going to be a film at all? And this one is a good example of how you need luck, and you need, chance, and you need kind of the gods need to all be, the planets need to line up. And we'll have a look at a clip. This is like one of her most famous songs, and it's just a weird way in which someone just happened to be there filming it. Not because they were making a film about her, but because they were making a film about the Dap Kings, who happened to be in the studio working with her. And then this girl starts singing, so the camera just pans over.
Wow. So, Back to Black.
All right. So, let's get this tape. No, we'll keep that. Yeah.
When I started writing the first song about Blade, the other songs just wrote themselves. I really was on a roll. Because I had these feelings, I had these words floating around in me. You write a song, you have to remember how you felt. You have to remember what the weather was like. You have to remember what his neck smelled like. You have to remember all of it.
She would tell me stories about Blake and this tempestuous, extreme relationship. That first day she wrote Back to Black, all the lyrics and the melody in 2 or 3 hours.
He left no time to regret, kept his dick away with his same old safe bag. Me and my head high and my tears dry, get on without my guy. You went back to what you know, so far removed from all that we went through. And I took a troubled track. My odds are stacked. I go back to black. We only circle back with words. I died 100 times. You go back to her, and I go back to black. Oh, it's a bit upsetting at the end, isn't it? Whoa, boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
It was just one of those serendipitous things. Like, I just caught her at that magic moment, and she was just ready to get it going. That's why I couldn't understand what everyone else was saying about this procrastinating, troubled artist.
So I mean, that's kind of the essence of the style of the filmmaking, where you have to find visuals, which we spend months, years searching everywhere. I travel all over the world if necessary to try and figure out. I heard someone was in the room when she was recording that album. Who is that person? Mark Ronson doesn't remember anyone even being there. Amy, I can't talk to. There's no one else there. But there seemed to be this guy from Brooklyn called Matt Rogers who was there shooting this doc about the Dap Kings. And the Dap Kings were the people that Mark Ronson brought in to be the backing musicians for Amy because he wanted this old sound. And he just happens to be there that day, and this girl that no one at that point really knows who she is, she's not famous, is singing, so he just swings the camera over, shoots it. And I saw a tiny clip on somewhere online for like a Dutch documentary, I think it was, and we were like, what is that? And then I have a team of archive researchers who then figure out, okay, which show, who got the footage, where does it originate, and do they have the original tapes? And that can take years. But that's part of our process, is just to spend however long it takes to find those tapes so that we can be there for that one moment. She only would sing like 1, 2, 3 takes max. And that's the one that the editor then tried it, and it literally perfectly syncs up because there were no edits. She never did that other kind of, she wouldn't add in the odd line. It was all like done live. But then I interviewed Mark Ronson. I had audio interviews that Amy gave, which we would research from anywhere that she gave interviews to journalists, print interviews, whatever it might be, to always have her voice front and center. Same with Senna. The idea of Senna was, it was Ayrton Senna telling his story from his point of view. And like when he drives, you're in the car with him, never with anyone else. It's always from his point of view. I'm not necessarily looking to tell kind of the objective sort of story of Ayrton Senna and to show the other. It was, you're on his side and his rival is your rival. And I want you to feel what it's like to be against this other guy who's this great French driver, Alain Prost. And so that was it. Amy's voice was really key to finding interviews. She stopped giving interviews around the time Back to Black came out, so there was a real difficulty of how do we tell her story when she stopped talking. And that's, again, where the lyrics would always help, because she'd write about something which is her at her most honest, and the lyrics being on screen will always give you the idea of her point of view and her voice.
Little Dap Kings connection. The Dap Kings are the backing band for Sharon Jones,
Absolutely.
who's featured in the documentary Miss Sharon Jones, Barbara
connected.
Koppel's documentary here.
We don't make this up.
I want to talk about the craft of creating these archive-driven films, because I think it's hard to understand that craft. You know, in the world of documentary, we understand the artistry of cinema verite filmmaking, but it's harder to understand the artistry of.
It's really a strange thing that I sort of fell upon, and it. For 2 different reasons. It just happens to be that Senna and Amy have been made in this way. Senna, originally, I couldn't interview him.
Let me ask you that. It's coincidence you didn't feel like after Senna, like, oh, this is my thing now, and when I get asked to make another film,
but for very different reasons. With Senna, it was a really weird one because it was like a studio film. It was like Universal, and it was working title. And they asked me, do you want to do this film? And I was like, okay, I'm interested. I like sport. I don't know what the angle is. And because there was the Senna estate, the Universal working title, it just took so long for anyone to bloody do an agreement and do a deal that I had already agreed I was going to make the film. Had turned down other work. But we didn't have any money yet. We were not we weren't cash flowed to hire an editor. So I just would go into the edit suite and I would look at material to do some research. And the more I looked at the footage, I just thought, it's incredible. It's all here. It's the best set of dailies I've ever seen, right? Why has nobody just put this stuff together? And of course, then I would mention that, and they'd say, don't be stupid, you've got to interview someone. And I'd go, yeah, I will, but I've got a feeling there's a really amazing middle, there's a really great ending, and I don't know what the beginning is, but he is really great on screen. But technically it's not great, because at that point I'm seeing really low-res stuff on YouTube or somewhere. But it's like there was an instinct that there was a really interesting technical way of telling this story that my job also is I'm interested by pushing myself technically whenever I make a film. I want to do a different kind of style as a director. And so that came out of the fact that for 9 months I was working on the film and I couldn't actually hire an editor, and I couldn't go out and interview anyone, so I was just working with the material, and I put an assembly, a 7-hour assembly, just of archive, and we screened it, and everyone was crying by the end, and it was like, okay, there's something here, I know it, But I was really being pushed constantly, go and interview someone, get Alan Prost, we need to see his face. And my biggest battle on that film for 2-3 years was to not put in a talking head. And I'm kind of stubborn, so I would go out and shoot interviews because I was told go and shoot an interview, but I'd accidentally drop the mic right in front of someone's face, and the shot got screwed up, and I was like, I can say it now, I was very close to being fired. It was really not, no film's easy. It was really like a bit of an argument going on. But we kept screening the film, and this is the other thing. The more we showed it, the more people fell in love with him and the technique. That bit by bit, everyone on the outside, upstairs, sort of said, maybe there is something here. So that was the big battle. Once that film came out, people went, okay, that's the style, and suddenly everyone was saying, yeah, we always wanted to do it that way. It wasn't ever thus. Amy was different because no one wanted to talk to me. Nobody wanted to be a part of it. No one wanted to. It was like, they don't trust me. This is exploitation. So I thought the only way I'm going to do it is just by talking to you without a camera, so that I'm not putting you under pressure. It's just the two of us in a room. And there is a microphone, and if you don't want to be a part of it, don't sign a release. I can't do anything with the interview. So I would never have the nerve of turning up with a camera, because I just felt they wouldn't talk to me. And so then I've got this audio, and it's like, okay, let's start cutting this audio together. What can we put to it? And it was for a very different reason. And with Amy, I thought for a long time, I'm not sure it's going to work. Quite a few times we screened the film, people would say, you're not going to be able to do that technique here. It's not going to pay off. It's not going to work. You're going to have to come up with something else. And I thought, okay, yeah, it might happen, but again, I'm kind of stubborn. And my editor and I just would then push. We push each other to just stick with it and see if we can keep that angle going. Sometimes having restrictions are very good for you to kind of have to think creatively. And because of those restrictions, I think that's when the idea of using the lyrics and, finding another technique. For me, Senna's like an action film almost, which happens to be a doc. This is a musical. This is a Bollywood film for me. It started with musicals in India start with the songs, and the songs become huge hits. And then they put a film together, and people go to see the film because they want to see the songs. And in a way here, we all know the songs. So the idea was, that's the structure, that's the map, that's her voice. What do we show to link them? How do we understand which songs do we have, which order do we have them, so that there's a narrative flow? And it was like, I knew I already had that, and I knew I had enough to show. It was always going to be a question of, how do you start the film? Where do you end the film? Who are the key characters? Which voices? I interviewed over 100 people, but there's only probably 20 voices in the film. So that's always tough. A lot of really important people didn't make the cut. And then you have to talk to them afterwards, and after they've opened their hearts to you, you say you're not in the finished film, which is a big challenge as well, dealing with all of that.
We have a few minutes left. I want to ask you about the quality of footage. When I watch these clips standing alone, I'm aware of kind of rough quality. But when I watch the film, I forget about that. And you're working with a lot of different source material. I mean, you're working with some source material that's pristine, shot on great cameras for broadcast, and then stuff that was shot by a teenager drunk at a party. How does that come together?
It's a big psychological step that you have to take, and it was, again, I come from, I've shot fiction films, beautiful, anamorphic, they look amazing. I kind of have my own period when I was obsessed with the image. And one of the things about making these films is for me to free myself up from the obsession with how things should look and this concept of perfection. I really love imperfection. I miss shooting on film. I love the fact that, there's a texture to celluloid, which maybe digital sometimes doesn't have. And so with Senna, it was a big battle to get a studio to understand. There may be clips that are YouTube quality that are going to be on a big screen, but emotionally, they're really powerful and true, and that's the only camera that was there. And I think for both of these films, that became a big part of it, of just getting the audience to realize that you're going to be in a place, you're going to be hanging out with Amy, you're going to be hanging out with Senna in a way that no one else normally gets access to. And if the camera's a bit shaky and technically it's not great, hopefully you'll get over that, because it will sound great, and also it's just a part of the process of almost freeing yourself up to kind of be in there and feel. It starts with me, then the rest of the team, and then whoever's financing the film. But then the audience generally, I quite like it on a big screen, seeing something that's not perfect. Because that moment, it never happened again. There wasn't a second take. There wasn't a second camera to cut to. With Senna, I was lucky that there were times when I had 8 cameras to cut between. He was so famous and that sport is so big, I could cut to a helicopter shot at any point if I wanted to of him. With Amy, it wasn't the case. Amy's the girl next door film, whereas Senna was like, you know, this superhero who had all of this big production value. So when the race in Brazil in Senna has got like 2 million people are there. There's helicopter shots, there's like steady cams, there's everything going on that we could work with and use. Here, it's really like you just happen to be in the toilet with her. You know, you're in the car with her, the camera's shaky because they're not professionals. But what she's giving you is the emotion and her smile and her eyes. And that is what I want, really.
Listen, we're so grateful for you coming out to Toronto to share your stories with us, and congratulations on all the success of this film. We're going to transition to our next session, but let's hear it for ASIF Kapadia.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks.